Good morning. Yes, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This morning, I'm going to be reacting to Kronan the Canon. Previously, I watched Kronan and the Tyranid Factory, right? And from that episode, it is continuing with. Where is it? I think it was called bug swatting, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Yes, Legend of Kronan bug swatting. And after Legend of Kronan bug swatting, it is Kronan and the Sentient Psyker Fern of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. Yes, I think that's how the progression is following, in terms of the episodes. I could be wrong. I could be mixed up with that, but I'm trying to, correct my mistakes from before, because the episodes were jumbled up in the playlist, and the playlist that Mitch has given to me is also, trying to, reconfigure the storyline in a proper way. And now I'm also trying to apply what I see in that playlist into my playlist. It's confusing. I know. I'm sorry. But I have been jumping ahead of previous episodes. So I think now it's in the right position. Hopefully. If I'm wrong about this, you guys can correct me in the comment section. But yes, after bug swatting, or should I say Legend of Kronan bug swatting, it is Kronan and the Sentient Psyker Fern of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. Yes, so that is what I'm watching today, this morning. Remember guys, if you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer 40k, the links are going to be in the description below. If you want to check out my previous reaction to other Kronan the Canon episodes or parts, remember that the reaction playlist card is going to be at the top right here. Yes. Okay, let us continue with Kronan the Canon. 3, 2, 1, go.
Between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Kronan, wearer of the jeweled crown of Aquilonia, upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Kronan and the Sentient Psyker Fern of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. And so it was that we rejoined the epic chronicles of our hero, Kronan, the Cunning One, Lord of all of Orquilonia, the big boss of the entire Cunning Wa, defeater of the Arse-starters, even the big knob Primanus Marines, abject slaughterer of the anal mini-tantrum regiments, bane of the traitor word-bearers, crusher of the buggins on board his mighty stair-sheep, the Orks of Omen, prophet of Mork, the god of brutal cunning. Or was it cunning brutality? A question that oft brought on an impromptu scrap, for none were ever entirely sure.
That is to be expected.
In any case, Gazgul was the prophet of Gork, the more blatant and obviously violent of the two. Not that there was much in it, if truth be told, but in any case, where Gork was a brick in the face, Mork was more a brick in a sock applied to the front of the noggin, or something like that. And so it was that the main decks of the Orks of Omen, a huge space hulk, had been cleared of all major resistance. Yet this was only the buggins infestation at its very core, the most numerous of them. And there were hundreds of miles of crawl spaces, alleys, hangars, corridors, rooms, barracks and bridges left unexplored.
Well, I guess you could say that the ship is going to be abuzz with activity for the orcs, as they continue to try and clear out any sort of threats that are on board the vessel. So yeah, this is good.
It was an ongoing event. For a Space Hulk was a merger of many ships, sort of smooshed together into burp.
And you can imagine some of those ships might have belonged to the Imperium of Man. Some of them might come from the golden age of technology for, humanity. Such valuable pieces of technology. Maybe one of them had an STC on board, and it's jumbled up with all these other decrepit vessels, making up the Orcs of Omen. It's unfortunate that it's not humanity that is in control of the Space Hulk and trying to comb through it for any sort of technology or resources that might have been left during the dark ages of technology, or during other periods of time of the Imperium of Man. All of that is going to be owned by the orcs, and I don't think they really care about anything aboard this vessel. They're just going to remodel it from the exterior and the interior. Anything they don't want, they'll just chuck into space. So yeah, it's really going to be something here. Yeah.
Warp, or something like that. Hence, there was a dizzying myriad of regions within the overall stair sheep. But it was no longer possible to procrastinate, for the Wa was very enthusiastic to get into the thick of it. Had not Kronan promised all and sundry a truly epic punch-up? A scrap that would satisfy all and more so had been his clarion call to action. So, Kronan, unlike most other political figures, who will say whatever they like while wooing the populace but firmly and fiercely ignore this, and are then able to stuff their pockets and pouches with peculated piles of cash. No, this was not the Orky way at all. Well, if you ignored the preponderances of the bad moons anyway. But in general, orcs like to say as they do, and do as they say. Especially when a huge bundle is in the offing. So, an offing, or offering, is exactly what Kronan had to provide. Yes, he did. And being truly orky, he knew exactly where to start. And so it was that the entire Wa set off for the place of first and last resistance. They set sail for the world of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4.
So, the first and last place of resistance against the Horde. Alright. Is it controlled by humanity? Is it controlled by the Imperium of Man, or is it controlled by the Smeldar, or the Tau?
Because, as we have heard previously, this was the only world that had resisted the attentions and intentions of the Wa. It had already repulsed 3 forces sent to that weird little green world.
3?
And none could fathom why this had occurred. Not that anyone would put it that way, for fathoming and fathoms entire had a more nautical feel. Although every boy, knob, boss, or even big boss was actually aboard ship now, it still did not entirely sit right with anyone but those oddies Hackbar, Grandmouth Tartan, or...
Oh, wait a minute, let me just write down their names again. Hackbar and Grandmouth Tartan, yeah.
Grinner the Backstabber. Now Grinner was a conundrum to many, for he was a freebooter. And it was passing more than a little annoying that whenever the 3 came aboard the Orcs of Omen, or Kronan's previous flagship, the Mork Rampant, that they would all become deeply tedious with their lexicon, their slang. It was midships this, to that, hard to port, or whatever to starboard, shivering timbers and threats of wheel hauling. Oh,
No. We cannot have that. We cannot have that. We cannot have different discussions or conversations between orcs. Everybody's got to speak the same language. Everybody's got to communicate in the same manner for Kronan, for the unity that he's trying to establish. If you guys are in your little camps of, you're talking your pirate talk, and and the other orcs are talking their own orcish language, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem, and hopefully Kronan will set this straight. We all speak the same language. We all use the same mannerisms. Yeah. Because this is going to cause divisions. And Backstabber still has that hat. I want that hat. I want Kronan to take that hat from him. He is dangerous with that hat. Nah.
Something like that. And Kronan found it mind-blastingly tedious. Like if you had to sit amongst a particularly animated set of topiary fans as they discussed the relative merits of exactly which forms of shears was the best for modelling perennials. Shrubs and trees and the like. And through it all you had an unfulfilled and particularly aggressive case of the trots, or if a bad doc had decided the gobsquids had been utterly avoiding you, and that most of your teeth now required removing with a chainsword. That kind of level of annoyance, where there is simply no escape from the interminable tedium, but to the level of true excruciation. Hence, Kronan decided on a new rule. Now he could have simply invoked the rule of 3, of course, and pasted them all whenever he started this off. Yet, he considered that knocking 7 shades of poo out of his admirals might be bad for the elan of the fleet. Plus, of course, Kronan was all too aware that when on campaign on any planet, they would be sitting above him with more Dakar than a gaggle of gargans. And convenient accidents with Dakar had been the end of many a war, as the big bosses always did look a bit less intimidating when you were viewing them from about 400 to 500 miles away through the targeting arrays of a fully locked and loaded bank of macro cannons. Kronan wished to be popular, of course he did, but he knew that absence makes the heart grow fondler, or something like that, and he did not wish to be fondled by a box barrage of macro cannon Dakar any time soon. Hence, he ordered Isaac Newtone to make suitable changes to the captain's seats and engines on each of the stairship in the war.
Okay, to what ends exactly?
Once completed, Kronan shared with Hackbar, Tartan and Grinner the consequences of talking their strange lingo. He did this by opening up comms with one kill cruiser after another and making sure the vid feeds were nice and clear before blowing the captains to messy fountains of green gore whenever they began their daft and tedious pirate talk, as he put it.
Well, I guess that's one way to set them straight.
With the last one, just to really hammer the point home, Kronan also blew the entire stairship to bits by detonating their engine.
I thought he was going to, bring them towards him personally and then maybe clap them on the face or something. I don't know. But this is also, it's very creative. Very creative. Okay.
After the first 2 or 3, Kronan was elated to see from the silent, wide-eyed gaping and instant whiff of involuntarily expelled feces that his admirals now knew the repercussions of not only crossing their big boss, but also of using this daft nautical cant. And so it was that nary a single landlubber, shivering timber, wheel-hauling or was to be heard throughout the entire fleet from that moment onwards.
Silenced. Never again.
Of course, this took the big mech, Isaac Newtone, quite some time, but it was all worth it. It did, of course, mean the slight delay of Kronan's other tasks on his docket, yet Isaac was like an orc possessed, and he rose to the challenges set by Kronan like a snot-raising squigs. In other words, he would often lash out at all around him with the largest stick, stone, control panel or chopper closest to hand, but with real avuncular warmth and affection, of course. He slew hardly any of his grot assistants, well, permanently anyways, and Happy Len was set to sewing grot heads back onto their shoulders whenever a delegation of stretchers arrived with the bits from Izap's latest outburst of affection. Hypocrates, the chief painboy of the entire war, was always busy, of course, for Kronan had quite a few projects for him also. Not that Hypocrates was in any way as affectionate to his own underlings. While Happy Lynn was present, Tiddles was often lurking around too, watching his emotional support grot or pet whenever it was doing this particular process. For Tiddles would look at the repaired grots with great interest, and if they did not move after Len zapped them a few times, the Avatar of Teeth would helpfully snaffle the remains so as to give his pet, Len, a 100% success rate in his ministrations. But Tiddles, watching on, did act as a clear deterrent to the kind of affection Hypocrates could dish out. And so it was that the pain boy could be seen on the regular sat at his medical desk pottering around with different fungal concoctions to, well, take the edge off, as he put it.
Oh, like some sort of drug?
Yet, even when barely conscious, and with eyes the size of saucers, the Mad Doc was able to pull off some real blinders. Well, okay, sometimes his attempts to enhance the smaller, runtier orcs did indeed end in blindness, but this was hardly par for the course. More often than not, the Mad Doc was as effective in his own tinkering as Izap the Mech Boy was in his. And beefier, more fighty orcs would soon troop out of his pain facilities whenever he was on a roll, much to the gratitude of Kronan. Not that it equated to any control of Kronan's pet, Tiddles, of course, but them's the breaks, as they say in the snooker circuit. The gratitude of the cunning one was reward enough. At least, this is what he would be heard to murmur whenever he had overdone his potions and was drooling on his work desk.
You know, yeah, it seems like with the orcs, it doesn't matter how modified genetically or otherwise you might be, as long as you are an orc and you can fight and you can take orders from your war boss or from the big bosses, it's fine, it doesn't matter. Unlike with the Imperium of Man, you know, they really don't look kindly to those that have been genetically altered. You know, they would call them many names like abominations and, you know, creatures that are, you know, not worthy of existence in mankind's Imperium. But with the orcs, it doesn't matter how hideous you might look, or, you know, if you're not born in the natural sense, you know, of an orc. It doesn't matter. As long as you are orcish and you can fight, welcome. Welcome.
But that does not tell us of the interior of the Orcs of Omen clear-out efforts, which is where this all began. For they were coming along very nicely indeed. And it was, yet again, as we should all expect by now, Kronan who came up with a smashing plan, in every meaning of the word, of course. For not only was it hilarious good fun, but it did indeed lead to the wholesale slaughter of near anything left in the dark recesses of the Orcs of Omen. Such a good time was had that these events were also added to the regular viewing arranged by the Mystery of Truth, for Kronan wished there to be closer harmony between the many branches of his war.
So this has been broadcasted to all the orcs in the war. Those that are on different vessels or maybe even far-flung planets. They're all watching, you know, this entertainment spectacle of orcs going into the Orcs of Omen bulkheads or different compartments or passageways and just clearing out anything that's in there. Oh wow, okay.
The inter-stairship golf matches were one thing, but too often one clan or mob was in charge of an entire vessel. Hence, it did not help in his higher reason. Kronan, in his infantile wisdom, or something like that, arranged for groups that had to be from different factions, sheep, tribe, or culture, to every other one in the team. Then, he would give the small mob of no more than 7 equipment in short supply, but it was of high worth and a bit more shooty or stabby than the Commodore Garden shooter or chopper. They were designed to support almost set classes of individuals, and when this was understood by the watchers, the new applicants would tend to advertise for classes of warrior. I mean, who would not want a goth as a heavily armed aggro absorber? Hence, the mobs were called adventurers and sent as parties into the depths of the Space Hulk looking for trouble. And booty, of course, but let's not...
Yeah, of course the booty, definitely, but more of the trouble. More of the fun of battling against anything that's in there.
Not get started on that again. Now, it was always one class that never quite made it onto the teams, as that could often end the team.
Which class is that?
Excited displays, or when jumped on out of the dark. The first few teams to actually get a weird boy ended up...
Oh, okay, yeah, no, definitely. That could end the team. I mean, if the weird boy loses control of his powers, you know, they will either blow up or some sort of psychic energy would just consume everybody that's in close proximity with the weird boy. Or, you know, demons might just start popping into existence and kill them all. So, yeah. You're taking a chance, you're taking a risk when you have a weird boy with you.
Up splattered across the decks or incinerated where they stood, for the psychic powers of the weird boys was on a hair trigger due to how mighty the Wa energy flowed through the cunning Wa. Yet, when it became a mandatory requirement to form a team, the weird boys started to bloom in an abundance or so. Okay, this did have a downside, as some entire sheep had been lost in spontaneous explosions, but in general, it was seen as quite the blessing, and after a few adjustments, it assisted the adventuring parties as well. And so, the parties began to gain repute and followers across many differing groups. The vid records of their escapades were highlighted, so the long drudge of wandering around in the dark was cut, and the endless battling was avid viewing across the entire fleet. And it passes a little odd that the parties often bumped into each other when given resupply coordinates.
They must have fought for those resupply, stuff or resources. They must have been fighting in that specific spot. If there's like 2 or 3 more parties coming for the same location to get the resupply resources, I'm sure they fought amongst each other.
Alas, this could lead to an utter massacre of the grots, as they were told to take the supplies to the said coordinates.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No matter what was in the way. And these resupply runs also gained in popularity as a show on its own. A breakout type affair with very ardent viewing, but more a sideline between main team exploits. Hence the teams never lasted too long and never had an uneventful episode, so to put it. Cross-fleet, mob, culture and tribal coordination went off the charts. The point had been to get every one of his boys to know how the others worked. Boy, weird boy, mech boy, pain boy, commando, knob, storm boy, tank buster, etc., etc., et al. And just by watching, the entire war were all upscaling nicely. Not that Kronan would have put it that way, but it was as stated. Now this may have caused some of you to be concerned, for does it not look like our hero, the cunning one, is thinking and acting more like the Humies or the Smelter?
No. This is necessary for the orcs. You know, they have to continuously fight. Either fighting themselves or they fight against other, entities or creatures. They have to keep on fighting. So what Kronan is doing here is not necessarily only about having some sort of synergy or unity amongst his orcs, but it's necessary for the orcs, to be physically capable of fighting at the goal. And, they have to get stronger. They have to enjoy their lives or their existence under the rule of the war boss. And that is to fight. They have to fight. They have to kill whatever on the ship, the Orks of Omen. Either they kill themselves or they kill, other entities or xeno creatures or whatever else is on board the ship. So what Kronan is doing here is expected. And no Humi would do something like this. No Humi would do something like this. You only gain to lose, your personnel or your forces if you do something like this. You only gain to lose a lot. But if you're an orc, you gain a lot. This is necessary. Yeah.
Well, of course it does. Yet, none of you have been privy to his genius in this regard. I shall tell thee. You see, when team loyalty and fandom reached its height, it was then that the inevitable broke out. For Kronan had concerns that most of his sheeps were filled with unity of single purpose, meaning there was a well-entrenched hierarchy, meaning there was less fighting.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Your orcs need to continuously fight. If they don't, they become weak. And once they drop down on Rama Lama Ding Dong, they're going to be ineffective. They need to have that pump in them to always be ready to fight. Yeah, it's necessary.
And Kronan began to get the reports for the differing teams having disparate fans. It meant that old loyalties were now split, and that led to wins and losses. And that meant when a favoured team lost, was slaughtered by new traps, or was even victorious, that rampages of inter-fan group violence erupted across the entire fleet.
It's like football fans.
No barracks, bay or corridor was without the constant din of never-ending brawling. And Kronan was proud. All he need do is hope that there was enough Hulk to continue his practice until right up to the big battles. Imagine the fightiness of his every last snot-grot boy or knob. And, for some reason, the increase in outright violence had begun a new bloom of the boys being grown in the bowels of the sheeps. So it was a spiralling affair, as Kronan had hoped. For he had need of extra boys, as ludicrous as that may seem from my reports on the size and potence of the forming Wa. But no. Kronan now had a full dozen or more of his rocks completed out in the asteroid fields of Orkolonia.
Oh, congratulations. And they must be teeming with orcs inside those rocks. Those asteroids, yeah.
Hence, the fleet did a quick jump back to their home system, and he called a big bash with his bosses.
Oh, he's home. Welcome back to Orkolonia.
The hall picked for this purpose was gargantuan, thought Kronan on the night before. Yet, when he stepped over the threshold the next morning, there was nary an inch of space unfilled. The reports he had always read about the numbers and strength of his Wa had one effect, even on Kronan de Cunning. Yet, the reality was another entirely. Kronan was assaulted by a clamour of his own name so loud it would have blown off a hair squig.
Kronan, Kronan, Kronan.
The congregation was now truly mind-boggling. The two admirals, Hakbar and Tartan, walked with him and stood a pace behind. Kronan then shared his dreams with his bosses.
Would they understand what you're saying? Kronan, would your bosses understand what you're saying to them? I mean, they're not... Orcs are not known for their big speeches, okay? You are special, Kronan. The fact that you can articulate yourself and your plans, that's impressive for an orc. Even a war boss. So I wonder, do your bosses understand what you are saying, or or are they just going to nod their heads like, yeah, okay? But good luck.
His expanded operations had sent out sheep across the stairs, and they had captured information from the Humies. The destination was now suspected. The fight of all fights the bundle of all bundles. This would be their own Armageddon. This would be the likes of Alanor. This would be the battle of all battles. Now, in good conscience, it must be noted that not many really knew what any of this meant.
Exactly. They don't know what Kronan is talking about. But I'm sure they'll just agree with whatever their war boss is saying.
But it sounded amazingly fighty, and a lot of them were bawling and drooling at the thought of it. Kronan told them of his plan, a cunning plan, that they would have 2 separate waves. Again, most stared wide-eyed, but nodded as he boomed out the next elements.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh. Hey, orcs. Oh gosh. Oh, they're such simple creatures. I love them.
The first wave would take a smaller fraction of the fleet and some of the rocks. They would see if this indeed was the place where the Humies were gathering. And if there was a huge welcoming committee from the Humies, then this was the place. The rest of the fleet would sweep away the threats that were in between, then join them in the assault. So, the first wave's main job was to give it a go, but if things got nasty, to hide until the main war appeared. Now, many eyes also glazed at this segment, but those who did understand, they were deeply enamored with the idea. It seemed so cunning.
And it is a cunning, it is a cunning strategy, definitely. One as a decoy, and then there's the main force. Okay.
And Hakbar was to lead the first wave. But this is where it became an audience participation event. For Kronan had empty rocks, and they needed to be filled. The volunteers came thick and fast. With just 1/10 of the offers taken, the rocks would be filled to the rafters. So Kronan accepted twice the amount of offers that he needed, for he would put in too many orcs so that they would cull their own.
Yeah, and that's necessary, for the orcs in those rocks to be prepared physically, mentally, for whatever happens on Rama Lama Ding Dong. Yeah, it's necessary.
Increasing their fightiness even further. And what landed on this world would be honed to a chopper's edge. The rocks were being loaded and made their preparations to leave with a meager fleet to support them, and that could take weeks unto itself with so many forces involved. Hakbar was definitely the right admiral to send on this kind of caper, for he was as cautious and defensive as a greenskin admiral could get, but he could dish out the whoop when required. With that little task started, Kronan was now free to begin his victory lap, as he liked to call it. This would be clearing all of the stair systems between Orkulonia and this small Humie world. Now there was the lurking...
Oh, so it's a Humie world. Okay, Rama Lama Ding Dong is a human, Imperium of Man occupied world. Okay.
Scumbag, the puffed pastry pansy that was to come, for Yanes Blonde, the Smeldar Corsair Admiral, was in the region up ahead. But Kronan had another stop to take before embarking on that particular campaign of extermination. A kind of warm-up, Kronan mused. Something to get his lads in the mood before he hit the local fortress worlds, stations, and of course, the Imperious Gravy. The
Imperious Gravy.
stair-sheeps of the line, as they kept being referred to in his data slate, for it was the gravy that ran them all, although there was some mention of a Departamento Manihorum or something like that. Kronan was never
It's just a lot of bureaucracy, Kronan. It's a lot of big words with a lot of complications. Yeah, it's just bureaucracy.
sure what the humans were blathering on about. It seemed to have some form of an effect on the regiments of the Anal Mini Tantrum and the Imperious Gravy, but not the Adipi arse-starters. Now Kronan did love his menu, his vista of opportunities, those things catalogued and identified perfectly for him.
When does this thing lose battery power? When does the data slate lose battery power? I mean, seriously, how long has it been active and, Kronan has been scrolling through the information back and forth? When does it lose power, or is it run by infinite energy? This thing is Kronan's holy grail, if I can say that. It's his key to conquering the galaxy. Yeah.
His data slate. Yet he was also more than willing to admit that so much of it did not make one lick of sense. Some days it was inarguably more a repository of utter tosh. One had to really dig to get to the best bits, and most shifties around the data slate led to more questions than it did answers. Why on Orquilonia would the Gravy or the Mini Tantrum need to get permission for fighting from some form of Minto, whatever that was?
It's bureaucracy, man. A lot of bureaucracy.
It just seemed that the Humies made so many different excuses to not get stuck in. Oh, the Minto told me I couldn't start a war. Oh, the Gravy wouldn't take us to the war. It just seemed like a depressingly grinner style of affair, where excuses were more in ready supply than ducker ammo. It always bemused Kronan how there were so many Humies, yet so few of them were of any worth whatsoever. The Tantrum were okay, he guessed. The Spaced Marines were far too orky to even count amongst the usual Humies, and the Gravy had millions of Humies in it. Yet again, so many seemed to have self-justifying existences and roles that would never be supported by any proper Orky boss.
Yeah, like the Orcs are very simple, to the point, very blunt. Even their politics and their bureaucracy is very efficient compared to, the Imperium of Man or any of these other factions in 40k. With the Orcs, it's simple. Their life is war, and the war will always and forever be supported, funded, resourced. It's always yes. There's never no's. There's never maybe come back to us in 10 years or so and we will discuss it. No. With Orcs, it's very simple. Very simple. You need a weapon, a darker weapon, we'll give it to you. You need ships, we'll give it to you. You want a brand new hacking weapon. I forgot what they call their swords in the Orc language, but if you need any sort of close quarter battle weapon, we will give it to you. You will have it. There is never going to be an Orc that will tell you no. They'll just say yes. Do you want 10? Do you want 30? They will always be upfront with you. Very simple. It's just yes.
This is why the Humies were pathetic. It was not that they were not successful, for that could not be denied whatsoever, had they not placed their boot on Orquilonia for generations uncounted. Well, to the Orcs at any rate. But to be plain, that could pretty much equate to about 24 years, give or take a couple of months. Yet the Humies did claim to hold most of the stairs in the Milky Way Galaxy, or something like that. According to the data slate, this was very true, and Kronan's own experience had seemed to back this up. For were his raiding forces not encountering the mewling Humies near every direction they went in? Of course they were. And victories were coming in at a new and much more healthy rate now. For Kronan had given first contact rituals to Gitsquisher McMurder, which he was performing with real gusto, so reports stated. In the last few days, he began really mixing up his swings, and even developing a few special moves, as some were calling them. But that is definitely for another time. Needless to say, McMurder was doing just fine in bringing new mobs, sheeps and flotillas into the war with the right mentality. All were welcome, as long as they understood who was the big boss. And both Isaac Newtone and Hippocrates were rushed off their feet, as we have already heard. Hakbar was preparing to go on with his fleet, and Grand Mouth Tartan was at Kronan's side as admiral of the actual fleet, and that didn't leave many in Kronan's inner circle. Oh, Madnut Krunkelstein had his uses, but they were astonishingly narrow.
So does Kronan need new bosses? Okay. Because I remember he had someone, I forgot his name. There was a orc that was going to be designated as a boss, and he was tasked to clear out the Tyranids on the Orks of Omen. I just forgot his name. But yeah, that orc died very quickly. That orc got killed by a Tyranid. And it came to a point where even Kronan himself, personally, with his Black Legion, they had to go in there and assist in clearing out the Tyranids. I just forgot the name of the orc that was, tasked to do that mission. I just forgot his name. Sorry, guys.
Of the time he was in charge of the adventuring parties and the entertainment therefrom. This seemed necessary, as the requirement for weird boys in groups was messy and very destructive. So he was there as a way to stop any really ghastly events from occurring on the Orks of Omen. Now Kronan was deeply enthusiastic about going through the burp for an extended journey, and he had been rather deflated by the lack of encroachment on his decks by the dork forces of the silly, as he called them. The fat smelly one, she who thrusts, the blue bookie bird, and the juice-head one.
She who thrusts. That must be Slanesh, oh gosh.
Yet he did not want to give these weedy human gods any more hold on real space than was absolutely necessary. So Madnut Krunkelstein was left on the Orks of Omen, generally making sure it wasn't sucked into the warp, or was it the burp? Kronan could never be certain. Not that it made much difference really. It was wide, wobbly and wibbly, and the touted things inside it were obviously depressingly weedy. Little was he to know how wrong he would be in just a few more paragraphs. Anyway, so it was that Kronan needed to either take Ducker von Smashoven off of Flyboy trading, or he had to expand his circle.
No, you'll have to expand the circle.
And another disappointment, really. Ducker stated in no uncertain terms that he was needed with the flight wings. For, as Ducker put it, most of the new corps of flyboys were about as dexterous as a gold bar that had been encased in 20 meters of rockcrete and then hit by a stasis field. They were about as well suited to void or atmospheric aerial warfare as a visually impaired mute hedgehog being...
Oh, okay, that's bad. That is bad. Maybe maybe they need more training, and thus, I don't think he should, remove this orc from his position. Yeah.
Tasked to mediate a rumble between hundreds of gargants. Hence, he declared that if Kronan intended for him to lead this sorry bunch of grotlickers into a battle against Smeldar, well, he would need every last second that Kronan could give him to whip or beat these ne'er-do-wells into shape. And Kronan sighed. It was, indeed, time to widen his circle. Now, this is not to be mistaken for the kind of circle widening that one might experience in the dark city of Komorah.
Seriously, Baldermort, seriously?
Nor the very similar kind that could occur at any of the million different celebrations put on by the foppish followers of She Who Thrusts.
Oh, gosh.
No. What Kronan meant by this was as it always was meant to mean. Back in the days before everyone started selling hentai, when they can't gain a decent reason to advertise their patron. It meant that he would have to get to know and then trust with tasks even more orc bosses. And Kronan simply didn't want to. Oh, he loved the adoration of the crowds, practically lived for those moments when his name was chanted and he felt like the huge strapping big boy at the centre of the attention, as he surely was. Was this not his war? Was it not entirely all due to his own actions and leadership? Of course it was. Yet Kronan preferred the masses to be adulating him at a very firm distance. nor did he really enjoy those moments when he had to try to work out if the recipient of his wisdom was actually even capable of understanding it, let alone retaining it accurately, nor thirdly, being able to execute his instructions to even a modest level of achievement. I mean, the last real addition to his inner few, his concilium, had been tragic violence.
Yes, tragic violence, yes. And he died, he died on the Orks of Omen to a Tyrannid, yes. Tragic violence, that's his name. Yeah, it was tragic when he died.
Pain generous of Black Legion. Yet, tragic had been a pair of smoking boots not long after his introduction to the overall narrative. Blasted by a buggin. Never a good look.
Never.
So Kronan had to go and actually press the flesh a little again, to get to know more of his bosses. They were a bunch of real oddies, if truth be told. There was a new leader of the Black Legion, who Kronan took to calling Appledon.
Appledon?
Because of his ludicrously tall hair squig. Yet his true name was Nog Crusher, the Nasty. For
I'll stick with Appledon.
he was known to have quite a temper on him, even for a knob. There was the nominal boss of the Storm Boys, a deeply odd blood axe who called himself Colonel Stinker, but he wore Premier Humi knockoff hats. Yet, to Kronan's frustration, he was as stupid as a bag of snot, and probably got his position through unrestrained violence alone. Not that there was anything wrong with that, yet Kronan had hoped his inner circle were not the only ones who understood what he said to them. The beast boss of the Squighog Riders, Higher Wafter, on his Squigosaurus Munchington III, being the third Squigosaurus he had ridden, or something like that. The two were known for their horrific body burps, hence the copious wafting that was always required whenever they were present. Yet, again, even when one attempted to overlook the horrific pong, they simply did not seem to get it. Bub von Butch, the lord of the Warbikers, was fighty enough to be certain, nor was he as daft as many of the others. So von Butch it was that Kronan finally plumped on to take command of the raiding forces. Oh, they would have their own individual war bosses while out and about, of course, but it was von Butch that would be generally organizing where they would hit, when, and with how much. The only thing about von Butch is how he had a tendency to bugger off on one of his long rides across the hulls of whatever ship he was on, which caused endless hold-ups and requests for decisions to be kicked upstairs to the cunning one himself, and that was definitely not the point of the whole thing. So Kronan had to lean more on Melton John, the Flashkit's boss, who would never listen unless the message either rhymed or was accompanied by some form.
Melton John? Hey. Okay, and that's the second in command of Bob von Butch. Okay.
Of music, drums at the very least. He also had this penchant for turning up to meetings with shaded glasses so preposterously large and shiny that it was hard to concentrate on anything being said, as all and sundry just wanted to jump on him and push his huge glasses where the sun don't shine. Yet, despite it all, the combination of von Butch and Melton was enough to get most of the real Grok's work done. Clinker, Wafter and Nog Crusher he would have to work out roles for that required neither talent, patience, ability, nor even willing, Kronan presumed. For these orcs he considered about as useful as a washroom attendant at a constipation convention. And so it was that Kronan ordered the first target for the Orks of Omen, and the war in total. It was to be the world that had already repulsed his forces 3 times. A rather unobtrusive and seemingly unimportant world, but in his general path of destruction. His path of conquest. So the fleet set course for Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. Now it has to be noted that the fleet catpains were deeply unnerved by this first wee joint through the burp, or warp, depending on your accent, I suppose. In any case, the call to remove all icons of Gork and Mork were being diligently checked on by Kronan's Mystery of Truth. And on the regular they were finding many a face, mask or icon which should have been put back into the cargo holds. For Kronan would tolerate no disrespect to the sigils of his lord, his guard, Mork, or even Gork. So each such image was catalogued and placed into deep storage on Orquilonia. And what a sight it was to see! Miles upon miles of grinning orc faces erected on the sites of previous human conurbations. A nice touch, thought Kronan. For surely this amount of religious iconography would protect his world of birth, while he and the Wa were off spreading the good word of the gods. With all smeller fields being dropped, and absolutely no protection from the denizens of the burp, off the gargantuan fleet went.
Yeah, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. But hey, maybe you guys will fare better than, like for instance, the Imperium of Man against the demons that exist in the warp. Yeah, good luck.
Yet, this is where things took a turn for the better, for almost as soon as the ships were in the burp, reports of mass invasions were being blared from nearly every starship in the fleet.
I mean, I've also said this before, that it's necessary for the orcs to always be continuously fighting, but in this matter, it might be a bit different. I mean, in the warp, the demons can't be killed. They'll just keep coming back, and the numbers of the orcs on these vessels might start to dwindle. Or I could be wrong about that. I don't know, but yeah, I'm just thinking that maybe they shouldn't just enter into the warp without a galley field. They can fight the demons in real space. It's fine, but in the warp, in their domain, in their territory, I just don't know if that's a good idea. Yeah.
And Kronan was not surprised in the slightest at who decided to take a swipe at him this time around. Had he not already defeated that miserable turd Toba, the sycophant of the Juice God? Of course he had. And Kronan had also bested that wretched liar and obvious lickspittle of the Bookie Bird, Bashtor the Arseflame. Hence, when it began, Kronan barely batted an eyelid. For on his very own bridge there appeared a wobbly effect and an odour as pungent as a Disney princess. Glittering lights appeared and hovered around his boys like...
It must be someone from what was it? She Who Thrusts. Yeah, from Slaanesh. It must be a demon from Slaanesh.
Flies. Yet they gave off some horrific musical bell-like laughter that put all on edge and made more than a few grind their teeth.
Yeah, no, I don't think the Slaaneshi demonettes are going to be really effective against the orcs. I just don't think so. I don't think they have any sexual urges, right? Orcs. I don't think so. I don't think they have any sort of sexual urges of any sort. Their main existence is to fight. So yeah, I don't think they're attracted to other orcs in a sexual manner. I don't think they're attracted to any other species in a sexual manner. So I don't think Slaanesh and its demonettes are going to be enticing to the orcs. Like mentally, physiologically, it's just not compatible. It's just not compatible with Slaanesh and the demonettes. So yeah, if it was Nurgle, it might be a different story. If it was Zinch or or the Blood God, it might be different. It might be a bit of a scrap that needs to be fought on the Orcs of Omen and all the other vessels. But with Slaanesh and the demonettes, I just don't think so.
The level of twee was suffocating and paralysing not only Kronan, but all of his lads. And unto this scene of a lovely, enchanted nighttime grotto type affair, where smelled our lovers might whisper sweet nothings into one another's ears while basking in the ambience, or something like that, apparated a being of exquisite beauty and shapely form. Kronan was shocked to his core, not by the sights and sounds assailing his green eyes and ears. No, he did not find the being alluring in any way whatsoever, for he did not have any carnal urges in that regard, nor did he have a handle that so many of the other races seemed to sport, and
A handle?
Kronan was somehow sure that all of this was to do with she who thrusts, and was only effective on those who had said handles.
Oh, you mean a penis? Oh my god, he calls it a handle. Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah.
Sidebar. Concerning the handles of the other sentient races. Now Kronan had seen many an update on his data slate about the form and suspected function of many of their races, and nearly all seemed to have this silly secondary nose, or handle as he liked to call them. It was invariably always placed between the legs. This secondary nose seemed to have the oddest nostrils, small round hair squig covered things that drooped at its sides. Sometimes the nose or the handles were longer than the drop of these nostrils, and the nostrils tended to get longer the older the Hume or Smeldar or Squat were. The toe were a bit less obvious with their depictions, but Kronan had a strong suspicion that they would match this strange trend. He knew this because there seemed to be other ones, smaller, daintier ones. They did not have a second nose, but some form of backup pouch. These ones seemed to have big ears on their chests, and Kronan suspected that these were in fact some
big ears on their chests?
form of detection organ, for he rarely met with the smaller sentients before all of the nosed ones had been slain. So they were much better at detecting danger with their big ears, and thus they hid better. And Kronan came to this decision as he had once come across a naked Hume. Without its second nose hidden beneath its clothes, he could see that it was pointing directly at him. Strangely, it reacted as Kronan gave the Hume a pasting, and it seemed to throb more as the danger to its owner rose in intensity.
Oh my gosh.
As this particular Hume panted more as he received his beating. So, being a cunning lad, Kronan ripped off this early warning.
Why don't you just kill the man? Why? Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
System, just in case it could be used to help the Hume avoid his blows. Fortuitously, Kronan instantly discovered that these handles were somehow keeping in all of the blood, for when he ripped it off, the Hume bled out far faster than he would have thought. Now the Humes and Smeldar were known for being very fragile indeed. To cut off even one limb usually ended in their deaths. Yet when he ripped off the handle of the Hume, it died so much faster. It also shrieked to a pitch and intensity he had never witnessed before. Hence, Kronan knew that his people were the followers of the true path. The Orks were infinitely more powerful than any of these other silly races. For the Orks, the greenskins, did not have these handles or plugs that were such a weakness. And now it seemed that these handles or noses, or whatever they were, also gave them a weakness to the girl goddess, she who thrusts. End sidebar. Yet
that has got to be one of the most disturbing sidebars. Really. Just disturbing and very painful. Oh.
Even without a handle, even Kronan was kept in its thrall. He could not move, and nor could his boys. The thing that appeared before him was all chest ears and trouser-height noses, twisting on the spot as it laughed at the cunning one. It was then that the little giggling balls of light with depressingly chirpy wings and dresses then took a turn for the meaner, as their hands exploded outwards into long scratcher-type things. Kronan would have called them claws, but they seemed so diddy that it was impossible to give them such a macho description. Alas, this was to be a shock for Kronan, as the little scratches turned out to be more than effective against the neck hides of his boys. One after another of his crew were being gutted, having their throats slit or eyes punctured by these tormenting little fairies. All the while, the twee music resounded in their heads and kept them rooted to the spot. Agape, frustrated, deeply pissed off that these tiny terrors were ripping and tearing without even the chance of a fight, Kronan could have wept if the orcs were that kind of a people. Yet they were not. And he was no wimp. Hence did Kronan do the only thing left to him. He began to think. Yet it was not truly he who was in charge of the process. For in this moment of desperation, his eyes flashed green, and he was overtaken by a feeling of holiness. And in his mind's eye,
What is going on?
being led by his benefactor, his lord, his god, Kronan was shown the truth of the matter. For the wee fairies were all bobbing around and swirling. The pink, tall, nasty demon in the centre of the bridge was also swaying and moving its feet in time to the music. And
Wait, are you telling me that Kronan is being possessed? By his god? Really?
then Kronan was thrown back into his own past, when he was only a wee youth, and he witnessed a memory he had thought lost to the sands of time. Well, he would have done if he had not forgotten it, but he had. So this was all tantamount to a new experience to the cunning one. Yet it was a good experience on so many levels. For he now saw one of the ancients of his tribe, a priest, but one who had passed before Kronan had become a proper boy even. Well, to be more accurate, the priest had been unceremoniously dragged to the highest spot above the village and then hurled from it with real zeal. And Kronan now remembered why his previous Axis Mundi, his Sanctum Sanctorum, had been that exact spot. For once, he had witnessed the ancient ways of his people.
So in that exact spot, I remember that's where he threw grots, right? For thinking. Oh, okay, wow.
For the priest had been hurled to his doom from the place he prayed, because he had been an astonishing killjoy who'd attempted to resist the new ways. Now the new ways were to just thump on drums and then bounce up and down, while trying not to fall over after drinking too much grog. But Kronan now saw the ancient ways. He saw the most holy of things. He watched the ancient dance of the orc, the haka. Instead of just bouncing or leaping about the place, the old priest moved in systematic ways. He extended his tongue on the regular and screamed a lot too. But these were not girly high-pitched screeches like the followers or demons of She Who Thrusts. No, these were deep orky shouts, often with really blue words interwoven with the act. And then he witnessed his salvation. For the old priest was armed like a convoy of hillbillies, leaving a take-all-you-can-carry free weapons expose. He brandished choppers as he lurched forward, stomping on the ground, shouting his orky shouts. Then stepped forward further, mooning or shouting some more. Yet, when Kronan watched through the eyes of his god, he saw the meticulous martial excellence on display. For each movement was no mere dance, it was a way of fighting. It was rhythmic, and in every way copied the more weedy and wimpy movements of the enemy. And so it was that Kronan gave out his renowned battle cry, and began to move as his people had in times of yore. He performed the haka.
So the haka dance is going to break him free from the influence of the Slaneshi demonettes. Okay.
And instantly, his limbs broke the spell and moved as he had intended. Whenever Kronan thought to deviate from his dance and move normally, his limbs would slow again, began to be palsied. And so, he knew that this was the way. And Kronan did his dance towards the closest fairy, now accosting his statue like men. His blades came up and down with such speed and ferocity that before he knew it, 3 of the wee horrors were cut to ribbons, and their wings were fluttering down to land in the blood he had tithed from their sliced corpses. And as he did so, the boys he had saved now moved as he did. Each drew out their chopper and performed the haka or so, copying the cunning one. And by the great god Mork, before a minute has passed, Kronan was at the tip of a triangle of greenskins, all now hacking the little nasties to pieces. Each orc saved, then joined behind him, as they danced their war dance towards the demon at the center of the bridge. The thing itself began to play on its noses even faster, for these were the genesis of the music that had held his greenskins in place, but no longer. The demon of She Who Thrusts was strumming so fast, the wisps of friction smoke were billowing from it, but no matter how hard it played, it was no match for the ancient ways of the orcs. And Kronan hacked into the thing. Its noses and spare ears were flying everywhere, yet it still lashed out and slashed with a long curved chopper. But Kronan was so fast in his hacker that he blocked every strike with his motions, and took off its arms, its legs, and finally its head. Only then, when the demon lord was banished, did the remainder of the colourful fairies disappear.
Really? Wow. I thought maybe more demons would be attracted to this situation. On the Orks of Omen and all the other orc vessels in the fleet. Because, they don't have the Gallowfields on, and they're still in the warp. So I would expect, more demons just to come to this location because, it's a free-for-all, essentially.
Kronan then checked on the vidlogs across the sheep. He had done it. The archdemon defeated, the Orks of Omen was mostly cleared of these annoying little fairies. Across the fleet, Kronan now opened up his comms and sent over his clear displays of his bridge crew, all doing the haka. And the vision freed many crews all across the Wa. Okay, some had succumbed and been utterly annihilated, but comparatively few, really. And this had been a learning experience. If the demons of She Who Thrusts attempted another boarding action, well, the orcs would be ready for them. Yes, they would. Alas, despite the journey being a colossal distance in real space, in the burp, it was over all too soon. Much to everyone's disappointment, there were no more concerted attacks, as they cleared out and ripped a tear in the burp so they could return to real space. And there it was, that large green planet at the terminus of their journey. They were now only hours of normal travel away from Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. Now IZAP had been tasked, along with the alterations to the sheep and the construction of an entirely new unit, all taken from one well-tested blueprint, with enhancing and augmenting the sensors of the Orks of Omen. For Kronan did like to see what was going on, and it was a very important element of his persona to be able to see what others could not.
And think.
And so it was that the Auspex arrays on the Orks of Omen were indeed some of the best to ever grace any truly orky ship. Now the effect had been rather odd in its manufacture, being two vast sensors next to each other, placed directly onto the front of the massive sheep, and this gave it a snout-like appearance. Now Kronan did not really notice that it was much more akin to one of the faces of Mork or even Gork, so perhaps this is why the other admirals were so flabbergasted when he instructed all to take down their own icons. But needless to say, after Kronan's demonstration concerning pirate lingo, they nary raised a hand or even eyebrow squig in dissent. Also, this could have had something to do with the newest member of his inner circle, for there were so many new arrivals every day still, and none could state that they had any truly unique abilities when there were so many orcs almost spontaneously developing new skills and attributes all across the Wa. For as the Wa energy suffused each new arrival, the explosion in Odd Boys had been exceptional. Pain, Mech, Weird, all the Odd Boys had become more prolific, much akin to the Grot explosions, yet with more discernible use and worth. But many a standard boy or knob would wake up to a nice growth or ability spurt, and it seemed to only be increasing as the density of the greenskins increased. so few now felt utterly convinced in their positions, but perhaps the inner circle. And that would stay static until the inevitable mortalities opened up a few spots. Ducker von Smashhoven, Madnut Krunkelstein, Gitsquisher McMurder, and Isaac Newtone were seen as unassailable in their places, deep within the council of the Cunning One, whatever that was. And they were deemed a clique that was now named Kronan's Mornaval.
Oh wow, okay, Kronan's Mornaval. Yeah, okay. Oh gosh. Right.
For only these four could dare to look at their navel, or the ceiling for that matter, whenever Kronan had gone off on a rant that was patently mental. Anyone else would experience an instant crumping from the big boss of bosses. Yet even these four had to be rather cautious. It was often seen that one or more of the more naval would loiter behind after a truly insane rampage had occurred, and most of the time the more strange diktats from the Cunning One might come out in a slightly more moderated way. This was rare, of course, for Kronan was indeed the Cunning One, and Mork was guiding him. Yet even the big boss could make tiny errors that might need a slight tweak before being enacted. Anyways, Isaac had definitely entrenched himself in the more naval with this particular act of engineering efficiency. Kronan now felt at home again, for he never quite got out of the habit of going to very high places to look down on his potential battlefield, and although he could not really be elevated any further, as his command thong was at least 20 stairs above everyone else on his various stair sheep, still, the additional vantage point via information and tactical readouts filled him with the same feeling. Hence, he was happy. And keeping Kronan happy was indeed a holy act unto itself, a sacrament to the great god Mork. With his enhanced senses, Kronan could see what was happening on this strange planet far better than any of the forces who had come before. All three had been annihilated, and some of the evidence was spinning around the world as they watched on. Now Kronan could not help but be reminded of his makeshift mobile arrangement in his own quarters, the wee gruts screaming and attempting to burn one another whenever they got close. It had put him in good stead to understand the images he was now seeing, for not many orcs had a really good handle on the conceptual skills required to take full advantage of a three-dimensional multispectral display. But Kronan did, of course. The labours of the past had created this bounty in the present. And
Kronan is unique, special, different.
Kronan could see pretty much exactly what had happened before. It wasn't necessarily the kill cruisers that had been so deftly smashed, nor the lines of them that slowly turned in space like a treasure trail. No, it was the exceptional accuracy of the attacks. For the wreckage were not just huge balls of metal shards, which had been torn apart by internal explosions from the likes of a missile or macro cannon. They were not drops of metallic tears that might have indicated heavy plasma or other heating weapons had utterly destroyed the cruisers. No, this was not the case. There were neat holes in strategic locations across each of the sunken stair sheets. Now, it was not easy to spot this instantly, for the wide variety and ramshackle design of the Ork cruisers, using designs in the widest possible meaning, of course, meant that no two were ever truly the same. Yet, after a while, Kronan and his more naval confirmed that the ships had been taken out by a limited number of ultra-long-range weapons from the surface of the planet.
So they have anti-ship weapon station installments on the planet. Okay. So like mag rounds of some sort of mass accelerator cannons.
And the wrecks were strung out, indicating they were taken out over quite a duration as the flotillas closed with the planet. Thus the planet did not have many weapons, or even had but the one or two, and their reload interval was not exactly swift. Kronan then ordered the snouter, the scanners, to be levelled at the planet itself. And before Kronan's eyes, the vision changed to that of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4, and all became obvious almost immediately. For dotted across the planet were structures that could only be fortifications, and said defences were clustered around large, downed stair-sheets. But Kronan did not recognise their design whatsoever. Well, to be fair, he would not have immediately recognised even an imperious gravy sheep, but it was safe to say he probably would have a Smeldar vessel. Yet these were not Orkish, Humy, Smeldar, or even Chaos Adipi Arstarter sheeps.
Tau?
And the structures from the ground were from landings, not crashes. For Kronan knew, having watched the footage of the megawhoops of Wankanda 2, that there were subtle differences between a forced landing and an outright crash. So, these sheeps had been landed on purpose and set themselves up in what was, inarguably, a defensive perimeter. But what on Orkolonia were they defending? And who were they? And so it was that Kronan ordered the fleet to hold at extreme range as he retreated to his quarters to consult with his most prized possession, his captured Humy data slate. Now Kronan had not had time to consult with his menu for quite some time now, so he set out to really enjoy it. Kronan chunked up on protein and made certain that Tiddles was being entertained by Happy Len in his outer quarters. He checked his guards were not the jumpy kind, then locked his door behind him. Kronan then got out his data slate and basked in its glories. This time, he allowed himself a moment to look at the long list of foes he had already crumped, and every image brought back good memories. Oh, yes it did. But he then got down to business, and strangely, it took him a while to find this lot. For indeed, they were not Humies at all, nor were they the other new thing he espied while searching for them. For Kronan witnessed the next best thing to the Gold Ones, a new adventure, goal, sub-project that he wished to indulge in. The Humies called them the Kin, but that was a tale for another time. And thus Kronan found the silhouettes of the downed vessels. They were from the Toe Empire, a
The Tau Empire?
fourth beer expulsion was mentioned in the smaller side notes, but it was indeed them. There could be no mistaking it. And so Kronan read on and boned up on these really strange little things. For the Toe Empire was not just one race, or so it appeared. They had sting things, and Groot also. Yet the majority seemed to be this rather troubling hue, as they were head to toe, pun intended, in this light shade of blue. Hence, according to the tuition of Mad Duck Krunkelstein, these beings would be very lucky, but also, as Kronan knew, they would be very cunning. Now Kronan looked through all of the details, and he was aghast. For it was true. They also wore unfeasibly large hats. Some of the most preposterously armed warriors of all time, as even their baseline firecasters, had the most prodigious headgear. If they could afford to arm even their equivalents of boy mobs in such attire. He had literally billions of boys and scores of sheeps. Yet, if the firecasters were this concentrated on pure cunning, yikes, this was going to be an epic scrap. He would need to keep his wits about him. And so it was that Kronan did not just peruse the entries, he absorbed them. The Toe Empire. Of course, they had leaders, the exteriors, or was it the effeminates, or something like that. He couldn't quite be
The effeminates.
clear, but he understood their names all right. There was O'Shi and O'Fa, the tall, gangly religious types. To be honest, he got a whiff of Smeldar from these ones, but their underlings looked like they did the real fighting. They were organized into something called the Fire Caste, and although they didn't look individually very flame-resistant, If they could throw about fire, well, perhaps there would be some fight in them after all. And so he went on. There was Commander Parshite, Commander Shadowrun, who were the protégés of Commander Pruneturd, or something like that. They had heroes as well, or so the data slate said. There was Dork Stroller and Pongtrike, but he doubted that any of these would be present. There were a fair few of the Toe Empire down on the planet, but perhaps not enough to mean one of these named heroes would be present. So Kronan read on. They had Spike teams, Belcher teams. Both seemed to rely on Ducker. The Groot he had more interest in, as they seemed very gnashy and potentially fighty. They had Groot hounds, Groot riders, all forms of Groot, and most were armed with choppers, and this was much more like it. Yet now Kronan got to the deeply odd and somewhat misplaced manga-esque robot thingies, as some people called them. There were so many types. The broad-wide cattle suit, the Slicer's cattle suit. They had Fliptide and Yahaha cattle suits too, and something called a Storm Splurge. They had little things that floated and gave off an annoying noise, the droners. They had Dakar droners, shield droners, tactical droners, all forms of droners. And much to Kronan's dismay, he began to see a picture forming in his mind. For one of the last entries were their hide walls. They were huge walls of energy that the little blue things could hide behind. And it dawned on Kronan. With the exception of the Groot, or this Commander Parshite, well, they were wall-to-wall Ducker. Nary a chopper or power claw between them. Ugh, thought Kronan. It was going to be a battle of blasting and bugging out. He would need every ounce of his cunning for this one. Yet, deep down, Kronan was not as concerned as perhaps he should have been. Not that concern is probably the right word, for he knew he had more boys than these little weirdos had charges to shoot. He could blot out the sun and order multiple cruisers or other ships to just plough into the planet should he feel like it. And so it was that Kronan decided that this would be another learning experience, not a true battle to the death, for there was bugger all chance the Toe here could really stop him, and he prepared to attempt to win this as if he had only a few boys, for he needed to be ready. No matter how many boys he gathered, no matter how huge the war that surrounded him, Kronan was pretty much sure that the Humies would still outnumber him when it came to a real scrap.
Yeah, into the trillions upon trillions. I like the fact that, Kronan is seeing this as a learning experience as well. Just like how he was learning with the demonettes in the warp. So, yeah, it's good that he's taking this as another learning experience, and he's not going to commit his entire fleet into this entire operation. But yeah, he's definitely going to need all of his cunning abilities from Mork, and all of his big bosses and their underlings are going to have to be very diligent in their work ethic in completing their individual missions for Kronan. Because, the Tau are not pushovers. They have some advanced technology, but their arrogance, I think, will be it will lead to their defeat. Their arrogance, thinking that it's just a simple orc, and the war boss of this orc horde is also predictable and not really cunning. That's what I suspect the Tau are going to be thinking. And that's how Kronan is going to catch them off guard. Yeah.
Especially that epic Mega Barney that they were preparing to gate crash. Hence, Kronan would try something that had never been attempted in more than 60 million years. Before, he had always used his dark arts as a tiebreaker, an edge to get the boys in close and in the kind of numbers that would end any matter. But now he, the cunning one, will attempt to beat his enemies with cunning alone. Of course, he needed to get the true measure of his opponents for this to be a worthwhile venture. He didn't want to blabber about a certain victory of skill and aplomb, then get his buttocks handed to him in front of his entire war. And so it was that Kronan sent down a first wave, just to get the lay of the land. He unleashed that which had been gifted to him by his god, Mork, the grots. And Kronan ordered a small set of stair sheeps to approach around the dark side of the planet and drop off his scouting force. Well, scouting was not really a precise description, despite the fact that they would indeed be scouting. His sacrificial force was more accurate, if truth be told. For Kronan was also interested to see if there was any real virtue in this sitting about and watching things at this kind of scale. He had been so confident before, especially when he came up with his plan for the smaller rock fleet going ahead, yet it had not set off just yet, and this approach he had used to great effect previously, not just in his battle against the Yowling Hiffon Space Marines, but also in his very first climactic battle against the Humi Boxers, the very scrap that started him on the pathway of cunning. But would it work at scale?
I think it will.
Would he be too remote, too disconnected to the hack and slash of the rumble? So, if this particular approach to cunning proved to be about as effective as a Smeldar attempting to resist a cyclonic missile by standing under an open umbrella, he would need to adapt, and fast. And so it was. The 3 strike cruisers made their way circuitously to the surface of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. The ramps opened and thousands of grots rampaged down the gangplanks to the surface. Many a vidgrot there was amongst them, so Kronan and his Morneval had a front row seat. The world was lush and verdant, covered in dense and ancient trees and expansive ferns. Little in the way of open ground was there to be found anywhere outside of a perimeter around these Toe Empire defences. The grots surged forward with their grot tanks, killer cans and sways of the wee blighters on foot.
Yeah, you can imagine. Oh man, the grots. Prove yourself.
It really
guys.
didn't take them long to get to grips with the Groot. For hiding in the trees were these strange and very stabby bird-doggy things, like a chicken crossed with a poodle, whatever those were, but the description stands. And they hammered into the grots like it was a Thinkmas special, which of course it was, but not for the poor wee grots. The Groot would ride in and hack all around them, taking out huge swathes of the grot. Yet, when surrounded, the little terrors took some meaty revenge. But this proved to be just the first obstacle. For when the grots hid behind their tanks and killer cans, they moved slightly faster, the Groot giving these particular formations more of a wide berth. Obviously, Kronan and his pals found this as absolutely hilarious as it was educational. When the grot column then approached the first Toe Empire hide walls, they had cleared a huge tract of land just before their defences, and onto this open ground sprang the grot charge. And it was then that the Morneval all practically wept with laughter, Kronan being as entertained as the rest. For the darker that came from the Firecasters, the Spike teams, the Bathfinders, even darker rigs attached to the hide walls, it slaughtered entire ranks of the grots as they ran at the shimmering blue walls of force.
Oh my gosh, oh the grots. Oh my gosh. Well, they have purpose, and that's most important, to have purpose in the Horde.
And these cattle suits towered over the walls and shot down into the grot tanks and cans. When any of them were struck, it was like a bowel-torrent squig had been suddenly trodden on, as a neat little hole would be punched through the vehicle, and the grots inside would be dragged through the minuscule hole at supersonic speeds. This gave the general impression that any of the things struck had just stopped for an explosive poo. And Kronan and his inner circle were practically shouting themselves with laughter as well. Or at least, they were. Until Kronan noticed something passing odd indeed. For while this was all going on, a slow and steadily rising vibration was coming up through the stairs and into his thong. Like the humming of a bee about 20 feet long, it now put Kronan off his mirth.
What, is it Tiddles?
He looked around, and then down, and there he saw the very genesis of this rumble. For it was no long, protracted trouser cough. It was a growl, and it came from Tiddles, who was also watching the images on the screen in front of him. The longer the slaughter went on, the more he fidgeted.
Oh, Tiddles doesn't like the fact that, the grots are dying in their numbers. Maybe because he has a pet that is a grot, Happy Lane. Happy Lane. So probably Happy Lane is down there as well, I'm not sure.
The more his hackles rose. Tiddles now looked with scrunched face and furrowed eyes as his growl became so loud that others now noticed it. The deck crew began to shuffle away from Tiddles as far as possible while maintaining their positions at their screens. Kronan now stopped laughing, for Tiddles began to pulse. A lambent green energy seemed to shoot from his eyes to his teeth, then back across his head, and it was getting stronger. And then it happened. Tiddles let out a huge ear-splitting roar, then turned and looked up at Kronan, his main eyes wide and watering. Tiddles locked Kronan in a plaintive, pitiful look of pure misery. And, for the first time, Kronan looked into the eyes of his pet squig and felt his consciousness fall into the very soul of his trusty Tiddles. There, he saw visions. Kronan was experiencing the history, the early days of his trusty sometime steed. He saw the dirt above and around him as he came to consciousness for the first time. His breath was filled with mud and dirt, and so he chomped with his mouth and scrambled with his wee legs. Always aiming upwards, he eventually broke the surface. There, Kronan saw the very mud patch he had himself been birthed from. Kronan, looking through the memories of Tiddles, saw a small thing approach him, a snot, and it cooed at him and smiled and brought some form of green gruel, and the snot fed him. Time moved quickly in his dream-like fugu, and Kronan saw how the snots cared for the squigs, beating them only when necessary, like if a particularly advanced and gnashy one took off the arm of one of the little caretakers. Yet these were only educational beatings. He saw life through the eyes of his pet, and he waddled around the camp, seeing the snots, the runtherds, the grots, and then, of course, the orcs. And it was at this point that Kronan witnessed the oddest thing, for he saw himself for the first time in the eyes of his squig. Even then, he was called Nutcruncher, and it was odd, the feeling that the squig had. When Nutcruncher looked upon Kronan, he was immediately overwhelmed with a sense of belonging, of wanting to serve this strange youth. For Kronan was not even the chief of his tribe then. And so, the visions ran through their time together in fits and starts, broken images of hilarity, bounding into each other's arms after being separated. How the squig would wait for Kronan when he went unto his place of power, his thinking spot. For Kronan would come down again, and Nutcruncher would follow him everywhere. He saw himself through the eyes of the Avatar of Teeth, the very first Hume taken down, the battle with the Grot Rebellion, the escape from the Tree of Woohoo in Tooth Smasher's camp. And Kronan had a moment of epiphany. Nutcruncher, now called Tiddles, the Avatar of Teeth, was obviously guided by Mork. Yet the lesson was his alone.
Yeah, well, all of you guys have been guided by Mork in some sort of way, Yeah.
For Tiddles had come to believe in Kronan from the very first moment he had laid eyes on him. In his own strange, squiggy way, Tiddles believed that Kronan would lead all orcoids. And through the memories of his pet, Kronan was struck with said epiphany. He shook his head in pain. It was like being struck with a million ideas all at the same time. His mind reeled, his soul was in torment. And, coming out of the visions, he followed the eyes of his squig. He saw the view screen, and where once he saw the most amusing slaughter of grots, their little limbs and ears and heads climbing into the air as they were being butchered by railgun fire, the burning and melting of so many that they would become puddles that formed mini lakes as the Spike team shot them with balls of plasma. But now, Kronan was not laughing. As all around him guffawed and sent messages to transport more grots to the planet's surface, Kronan slowly rose to his feet, and all around him went quiet. The tears wiped away, the chortling ended, for he had a corona of power that matched his pet. Green energies pulsed from his massive tusks across his eyebrow squigs, then back down to his arms, collecting in his knuckles. For truly, Kronan's eyes had been opened. What he now witnessed was not a hugely entertaining grot slaughter. No. He was watching orkoids being smashed. He was watching his own people being annihilated. And, for the very first time in his existence, on the part of a column of grots and snots, Kronan was now fucking livid.
Wow. To think that he has developed, can I call it an emotional connection, if I can say that, or sympathy for other orkoids who are not orcs. So fast, he's developed those feelings so fast. Of course, yes, he's been seeing the visions of the past through the eyes of Tiddles, who was Nutcrasher before becoming Tiddles, and seeing these snots or the grots taking care of Tiddles, and that kind of creates that understanding that we are all orkoids and we all need to work, or we all need to defend each other against the enemies that would fight against us. And yeah, it's interesting how he's developed this sort of connection now with those that he does not consider as important or just as a resource to be used. Because he's been using grots like his playthings. He's been using them for his, what was it called again? Grotnotomy, something like that. I forgot. Just playing around with grots and twisting them and using them for his thinking sessions, and of course also eating them and throwing them off a cliff. So yeah, it's just interesting how he's developed this I don't know if I should call it sympathy, but this connection with the grots. Yeah, interesting.
He looked down into the eyes of Tiddles, who looked up at him still, with a grimace that would have made half of his black legion soil themselves instantly. He nodded down at Tiddles, and then the two threw back their heads in unison, and out it came. The War jumped to action. Not next episode, not after days of meticulous planning and conniving, nay, they just kicked off. Kronan left the bridge and stamped down to the pits, taking off his upper body armor as he did, and his procession, his mighty stride, brought more and more orcs of size and worth forward. They descended to the oars. There would be no subtle clash of cunning. That would have to wait until next time, for the cunning one had finally learnt his last major lesson. There would be plenty more to be certain, but this one was a whopper. For now he knew his pathway, his goal, other than just the collecting of the gold ones, of course. That would be a much-cherished personal side quest, kind of a bonus end-game thing after you've gone through the main quest, or a last major update with DLC. First, he had to do what Mork intended. He was his weapon now, and he would strike down all who stood against him, all who hunted and slew, all who held weapon against. The whole of Orkidom. Now, That's not to say he wouldn't enjoy every last second. Of course he would. Was he not the most orky orc in the War? And he was infused with the power of the War, for he now knew the wrath of Mork, nearly as brutal as that of Gork, but more cunning-like, yet still the wrath of the green-skinned guards. Trouser-fillingly fighty. And so it was that Kronan took up his place amidst the oarsmen. All of the whippers stood nervously for a time, until the cunning one called them all miserable weedy snots. And with that permission, nay, challenge given, they really went to town. Not only on the big boss, but on all of his now shirtless guard present, which was most of the room now. With barbed whips they lashed at his back, tearing off great gouts of flesh. Yet Kronan knew that this was right. He had to lead by example as much as intimidation. Well, that's not entirely true, really. More romantic dalliance from yours truly, I guess. Yet the cunning one knew what he was about. The huge cannons of the toe on the planet could gut smaller cruisers in one volley. Kronan would not allow his boys nor his stair sheep to be wasted any longer. No matter how funny it would have been, the slaughter of the Grots would be avenged. They did indeed die in vain, but at least it was not for giggles anymore. Kronan ordered the Orks of Omen to the front to form the spear. He knew that existing wisdom was to just shout down the comms and head on in. Yet Kronan had been watching his Grot mobile, had discussed with Hakbar and Tartan. So, the weapons of the toe could punch through a sheep. Kronan ordered the fleet to disperse, to fill the skies. They would never hit everything, so they would attempt to hit the most dangerous threat, and thus the Space Hulk would plough towards them at top speed. But more than this. As the long oars of Kronan's own devising came out of the sides of the Orks of Omen, he and the other pullers put some real welly in, just to use some of the pain they had accumulated from the whippers, and it was soon set, the challenge. Who would stop first? Who would drop first? The pullers or the whippers? And Kronan stomped his feet as he pulled, and all joined his cadence as they locked activity. The orcs pulled on the oars, and the Orks of Omen would shoot forward in momentum with each mighty pull. Yet the effect would burn off fast for some reason, and so it was that Kronan's flagship came hurtling towards Rama Lama Ding Dong 4, guns blazing down on the planet. A landslide slammed into the fleet and struck the furious Squigoth, the Ork battle sheep. It lurched and spun out of pattern. Gouger Grumbleblaster's ship did not respond to comms. Kronan was now standing in a pool of his own green blood, as the whippers gave it the old college try, whatever that means. But the effect was already telling, as they could all hear the thump and swearing that can only be elicited from gunnery boys when mid-Barney. As the Orks of Omen had already started firing on the planet, which meant that their speed was excellent, yet this was the crux point. A few too many hits from the frail gun, or something like that, could possibly even scupper the Space Hulk, or at the minimum, shear off large chunks of it. So speed was indeed of the essence. They had to get in close enough for the wildly inaccurate firepower of the Ork gunners to take effect and silence the largest ground-based weapons. So Kronan pounded his feet as he and his men tugged on oars hundreds of meters long. Their every sinew screamed under the effect. Even his biggest knobs were snapping tendons, pulling biceps and triceps, and all the seps in their sheer display of effort.
Gosh.
Then the lights went red. They'd attained as much forward motion as was safe-ish. We are talking about an Ork fleet here. They were now at the kind of speed that allowed them to pass over the planet and bomb their living poo out of it. Okay, that might not have seemed very sensitive to those grots who may have survived the monumental carnage of the day, but this was a Rowengi killing spree, and none would tell Kronan nay. Speed gained, Kronan and the pullers now unlocked themselves from the oars and chased the flagging whippers, and gave a mild shoeing to the ones who had exhausted themselves the most in fulfilling their duties. But it was only a friendly kicking, really, and then off they went. Kronan now bounded along corridors, hurling himself into the air when there was a crowd that held him up. His guard followed as best they could. The entire sheep was alive. The gunnery, or big shooter boys, were moving as fast as ferrets on speed, reloading, firing, and reloading again, as if orcs possessed. Yet, to a certain extent, they were. Sidebar: the primal urge for darker. Now, we have previously mentioned the drive for fighting, food, and speed. But these are only 3 of the fundamental needs of the orc, the greenskin. And each of these forces will gain adherents that will devote their entire being to its pursuit. The flyboys and speed freaks are a famous type of fixated orcs, yet there are others. And for these particular orcs, the need for darker was a ravenous black hole of yearning. To be near them, to hear them fired, to pull them and move them into position, to then goggle and scream in adulation at a direct hit on the enemy. The joy of darker could usually be eased successfully with a mere shooter, but for some, it leads to being a tank buster, and then on to further steps, until the ultimate expression of darker was the only thing that could fulfill this fixation. For nothing, and I mean nothing, had bigger darker than a battle cruiser. Sidebar over. Kronan now reached his destination and quickly donned his power armor. Resplendent in its shininess, robust in its thickness, veritably opulent in its shielding. Kronan was now the big boss of billions of orcs, and he had the armor to prove it.
Nice, Kronan.
Yet another task performed by Izap, for it was not actually Kronan's idea this time. After the vision of Kronan sliding down a corridor towards a blaster bug had been viewed by the entire War, some did tend to cluck a bit. Not that any of them would even conceive of asking Kronan not to fight himself. That would be utterly ludicrous. They just felt that he should be as well equipped as his enemies might be. He represented the entire War now, and they did not want him to get his arse kicked, basically. Not without an epic scrap. Battlefield accidents from plasma weapons had a strong track record of stopping a war in its tracks, and so it was that Kronan now had overlapping refraction shielding. He didn't.
Jeez, it's going to be difficult to fight this guy. You'll need a small army to face up against Kronan.
Turn them on often, but they were there. Mostly in case a Hume or Smeldar cat tried to drop an airstrike on him, if truth be told. Yet they did not hamper his use of limb nor headbutt, so he was rather nonchalant about that particular facility. Nor did he like how they interacted with his own hidden field, but we won't delve into that, for it...
The hidden field that's between his butt cheeks. Oh my gosh.
It is not really important and a tad odd. Or it could be, if we discussed it. So let's not. And so it was that the Orcs of Omen were skirting orbit of the planet before any others. The fire from the Hulk had cracked 2 egg-like energy spheres on the planet. They had shields too, you see. Concentrating their fire as best as was possible for the boys, they broke down the shields, and then flattened one of the main Planet 2 Starship-grade weapons platforms. It turned out that was all that was necessary, and even effectively possible, as the Hulk moved too swiftly to slow itself. Not that this was ever part of the plan anyways, and calling this a plan was stretching the meaning to almost snapping point. Kronan now boarded an assault craft, and was matched by a large chunk of those on the ship. Down they went in their droves, the air so thick with transports that the defensive fire that came up from the domed regions did not hit 1 in 10. But Kronan was cunning. He ordered them to land first and head to the centers of resistance on foot, which, of course, took them below the canopy of the ever-verdant trees and out of firing solution from the horrific Todaka. Orcs now flooded the jungles, catching groups of Groot and encircling them, then destroying them with great gusto. For their part, the Groot did really well. Everyone agreed that if the chance ever came up again, even if it meant a little bit of a detour, then they would really enjoy doing this again. Well, the Orcs did. The Groot, being dispersed across the floors, leaves, trunks and canopies of the trees, did not have a great deal of say in the matter. Kronan strode into the forest towards the nearest tow facility, hoping for a signal that his new units had made planetfall. The positive answer was made obvious when they came through the trees towards him. 20 perfect replicas, all large battle wagons, and reports rolled in as he took command of his steed. The Daka from the facilities was even more effective on orcs than ever it was against grots. Kronan was not too worried. In about half an hour, the Mork Rampant would hit orbit, and then things would get very interesting. Time to take down as much as possible before reinforcements arrived. And so it was. The Kronan took his lead vehicle and swung it in the direction of the tow base. The trucks would move steadily through the forest, crushing trees down and rolling over the top of them. It was slow but steady, and the tow struck. Slice's cattle suits started appearing across the sector, yet this was forest and jungle fighting. The orcs were born for this.
I mean, they're green as well, so they match splendidly well with the forest.
The larger issue were the storm splurges that stood above the hide walls and fired out. They had already done for tens of transports and kept any large assets away, while the tow spike squads kept back the shooter, burner and chopper boys. But not anymore. For Kronan took his vehicles only so close, then he gave the order, and each of the trucks then began to transform into barrage artillery.
Whoa. Battle wagons can do that? Oh, okay. Wow.
And the combined box battery fire from the fleet of cannonmobiles slammed into the hide walls at first, then crept over them and cascaded into the fire warriors and storm splurges behind. The shields of the tow were too high and protected against the orbital bombardment, not semi-direct low-arc weaponry that streaked into their camp and blew everything to being not upright anymore, nor breathing. And all seemed to be going quite well for a while, until Kronan started getting confused reports. Some of his boys had betrayed him, or so others said.
What?
And they began to shoot and fight one another.
Oh. Well, that's negligible. You know, it happens.
This was not right. Not in a proper fight. Yet, it was then that realization dawned on Kronan. Who brought down the Tow Empire starships? Surely, they were able to just repair them and move on. The Humies had always said the Tow were very smart. So, why were they here? Landed on a planet with no notable resources? What was at the center of their defenses? For it was an area miles across. Kronan looked all around him while attempting to encourage ideas to hit him in the mush.
I mean, maybe they're just creating a settlement here on this planet.
Then looked at the huge ball of teeth that stood next to his original Cullen-mobile. Now, just because I do not mention the avatar of teeth does not mean he was not present. In fact, it is a wise listener who naturally places Tiddles at his master's side, unless specifically mentioned otherwise. And even so, Kronan could see the rear of his pet as he wandered around waiting for everyone to get on with it. Small herds of other squigs straying around him like wee ducks around their mother. Well, if the ducks were mutated balls of fury. But on with it. Small herds of other squigs straying around him like wee ducks around their mother. Well, if the ducks were mutated balls of fury. But Kronan could now espy 3 spectral faces in the rump of his pet. Now it was no secret the 3 weird boys had been sown to Tiddles before the battle against that traitor Toba, nor that he had seemed to absorb them into himself. Now the faces of aforementioned psycho weird boys were visible, which could only mean that mindy-windy powers were in the mix. So, thought Kronan, this is how they repulsed 3 assaults. This is why the Tow warriors and sheep were all here. There was some form of powerful, wizardy thingy here on Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. One that was all about defense and nothing of offense. Rooted to the spot, one might say. And so it was that Kronan now ordered his orcs back. They were to retreat and spread out. Now, This wasn't actually to stop them all being blown to grot slop by the frail guns of the toe. It was more to keep them away from each other, so the chances of wholesale self-crumping were at least a little offset. Kronan disembarked from the Cunninmobile and headed out alone. Well, apart from 50 mega-armored knobs. And, of course, he advanced on the area that they had shot. The firepower from the box barrage had indeed massacred every toe within, hence there was an opening. If Kronan could remove this King Weird Boy, then he could call up to the Mork Rampant and bring this all to a close. And
so this King Weird Boy, is it a human being or is it another alien species? I wonder.
So it was that Kronan bounded into the trees. Now, to say that his progress was uneventful would be a deep lie, for in reality he was accosted on the regular. A rogue pack of Groot pounced on him after he misjudged a leap and went right off the side of a minor hill, and he landed right in the middle of 30 Groot. Kronan had used his massive chopper in one hand while grabbing a Groot hound and using that as a bludgeon or shillelagh to smash another half dozen into pulp.
Oh gosh.
The rest being fallen on by other orcs and, of course, Tiddles and his mini-me's. Nor was that the end of it. After only a couple of 100 more yards, a gun line of spike teams rounded a bend in a river and opened up on Kronan. 3 of his knobs were punched off their feet, with another falling forward, with a neat hole in his chest and a line of green spatter shooting out of him for 30 foot. Kronan opened up with his own shooter, its huge darker, exploding the 5 huge hats and what was beneath them, and Tiddles was on them in a flash. Appearing at their right flank, he opened his mouth and charged down the line of the toe, scooping up as many into his maw as was possible, which was another 3. The rest were dragged down by smaller squigs, or torn to pieces by accompanying ducker from the Legion. Reports were even more garbled, as Ork slew Ork while charging a toe. It was a mess out there.
Okay, this is not becoming negligible anymore. This is a concern, a serious concern.
Perhaps he should have gone with this entire cunning thing, and not reverted to outright war. But then, was it Tiddles, or his benefactor Mork, or the infusion of war energy that had prevented Kronan succumbing to the Sentient Psyker whose power dominated this Rama Lama Ding Dong 4? Kronan did not have the time, energy, or interest to discern this. At moments like this, it was just time to crump something with extreme effort, and now was indeed that time. He was now headed into the very center of the defended zone. Moving as fast as he could, Kronan barreled into a clearing, and there, right in the center of it all, was unmistakably the culprit. For it was an odd thing indeed, meaning, of course, that it was important. Kronan now locked eyes with something unspeakably ancient. It towered over him at above 60 feet tall. It was 5 paces wide and, based on its eye effect, it may have been a tad paved. Standing before Kronan was some form of animated tree.
Yeah, I think this is something from Nurgle. I think it's a demon that Nurgle, has created of some sort. Yeah. I think it's attributed to Nurgle. That's what I think.
One of the knots of wood in its bark then unclenched to form some form of hole that then bellowed a mighty bellow. Its branches came down to form into dangerous, thorned and powerful fists. Its eyes were flames that seemed to burn on the bark just above the knotted mouth, and they were blazing so that small fires were wafting up into the leaves above its head. Constant small amounts of ash fell around it as the fires leapt and moved. The shout of rage that emanated from the colossal Sentient Psyker Fern smashed into Kronan and Tiddles, yet broke inches from their skin as it passed around them. All behind Kronan and his pet were not quite so lucky, as said psychic shockwave incinerated their minds so that they instantly fell to the ground, flame bursting out of their eye sockets, mouths and nasal passages. Kronan and Tiddles frowned, looked at one another again, Then both nodded and looked back at the tree-beard wannabe. It stepped one huge stride forward and whipped one of its long branch-like arms towards them. Kronan dived over the attack. Tiddles was simply not there anymore, the branch swiping through green light where he stood. Kronan rolled and came up, diving towards the tree's main trunk. He was batted hard by another branch, sending him directly up into the air. Alas, Kronan could do nothing to prevent being used as a piñata on the downward flight. Yet, as another branch was being wound up to bring into Kronan, Tiddles reappeared. The avatar of teeth dug its dentures deep into the bark of the main body and dragged at it. Much bark came off. No small amount of sap sprayed across his face and into Tiddles' hungry maw. But this was not the main thrust of his maneuver.
Oh, there's more?
The tugging was expertly timed to put this thing off its upward swing against Kronan, who came down hard into the ground instead. Luckily, he landed on his face, so no real harm was done. Kronan rolled up. Tiddles was still chomping through the tree like it was a particularly tasty treat, when we all know that shrubs and ferns are really for whittled bunnies. Yet, he was dealing real damage. The thing tried its psyker bellow again, but as it opened its mouth, Kronan leaned backwards and then hefted forward and lobbed his chopper right into the center of its gob. The thing was hit in its weakest spot, and the chopper came out the other side, oceans of sap following it. The Sentient Psyker Fern now moaned deep and low as Kronan stood up and aimed his wrist-mounted ducker cannon at the rest of the wood attaching the head to the main trunk. Between his almost endless ducker blowing table-sized chunks off it with every impact, and Tiddles not just pulling its bark off, but yanking it down as well, the Sentient Psyker Fern of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4 did not last. It toppled backwards, and the landing knocked what remained of its head from its mangled upper trunk. Its branches went still, and it seemed to rapidly decay before their very eyes.
That's good. This abomination had to go. I don't know if it really is connected to Nurgle. I that's what I was thinking, but I don't know. But this Psycho Fern was a threat. It had to go.
Over the next hour, the clashing between Kronan's own mobs generally calmed down, and the Mork rampant hove into strike range. And with one signal from Kronan, a herd of stampeding gargantuan squigoths was teleported down 5 at a time.
Oh gosh.
The tow facilities were then flattened as the mighty squigoths broke down anything in their path, and the colossal darker on their backs was levelled at everything that evaded their charges. The fact that the tow forces were coming out of a psychedelic enthrallment that had been years in the making added to the confusion for these poor sods.
Oh well. Bye-bye, Tau.
Not even with the cattle suits fighting as hard as they could was it possible for them to contend with the power of the Wa. And by the end of the next day, not a single Tow, Firecast, or Groot lived on the entire planet.
Kronan, 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 Kronan.
Kronan had done it again. He had conquered another world. Now, it was time to take his winning streak to the stairs. For his next target was that rapscallion and rascal Elder Corsair Admiral, Yanes Blonde.
Oh wow. Wow. Guys, yes, that is it. That is it with Kronan and the Sentient Psyker Fern of Rama Lama Ding Dong 4 on the Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel. Yes. Yeah, this creature had to be destroyed. The fact that it has such powerful psyker abilities to influence other species to defend it, and also for other species to fight amongst each other. Yes, the orcs generally do fight amongst each other, but when there's an operation being led by the war boss, you don't really expect the mobs to be fighting amongst each other at such a heightened rate as they were on Rama Lama Ding Dong 4. So yeah, it's a threat that had to be eliminated as soon as possible. I'm actually quite surprised that the Tau were being manipulated so effectively by this entity. Um, yeah, the fact that they even made a defensive ring around it, protecting it with all of with all of their resources. And I wonder, did they have an ethereal with them? This entire Tau task force, or flotilla, if I can say that. Did they have an ethereal with them, and what happened to that ethereal? Was the ethereal killed by the Psyker Fern, and the Psyker Fern took its place as being the control node or the leader of these Tau forces? I'm just wondering, like, what happened, because I suspect that an ethereal would be able to protect the Tau from such powerful psyker influence. Because I suspect that the ethereals are also psychers themselves in some sort of way, because of their way of compulsion on the Tau as a species, or the different Tau species, I should say. So yeah, it is interesting how the Tau came to defend that location against any sort of threats that would harm this Psyker Fern. Yeah, the character development of Kronan in terms of his, like I stated before, I don't know if I can call it sympathy or empathy for the grots that were dying. I don't know if I can call it that, but he has. He does have some sort of kinship with all orkanoids. That it's not just the orcs, but also the grots and all other orkanoids that exist. He does have some sort of affinity for them all. They're all part of his war, and if you attack one, you attack all, and therefore, as the leader of this war, he represents all the orkanoids, and he must, be at the forefront in protecting or defending the honor of the orcs, the orcs of Mork, because this is his war, this is his horde, and no one can disrespect his horde but him, if I can say that. So yeah, it is quite interesting to know about this character development through the influence of Mork, I should say. Influencing Tiddles, and Tiddles being able to show his past to Kronan, and also yet again Mork helping out Kronan by remembering the Haka dance while he was in the warp. That was also quite interesting to see that, Mork is really, putting in the effort for Kronan. Yeah, it is different. It is something that's unique. And it happened twice, first with Kronan and now with Tiddles. So yeah, I think Mork has taken great interest in the conquest that Kronan is commencing throughout the galaxy. That's his favored child, if I can say that. Yeah, or champion. So yeah, Kronan is really being supported by his god. He's not just talking about it; it's actually factual truth that Mork is supporting Kronan every step of the way. Yeah. The situation with the Orcs of Omen, and clearing out the many decks and corridors and everything else within the Orcs of Omen, using the orcs in different groups of different tribes and different skills and abilities, was genius by Kronan, and it also created a lot of team support that would lead to rowdy situations, that would lead to scraps in the fleet, and that was also genius. Just to keep the orcs active, to keep the orcs alert and fully physically capable once the time comes. So yeah, that was a really good idea. And Kronan having to come back to Okolonia to discuss his future plans with all of his bosses. Yeah, that was funny. That was really, really funny, because most of them just did not understand a thing that Kronan was saying, but they will agree because it's their war boss. And also the fact that Kronan has to start looking for new people who are going to be part of his circle, not his inner circle. He already has the 4 people for his inner circle, his Monaville, but those within the outer periphery of his circle. His selections aren't really that convincing, but I'm sure what's the name again? Bob Von Bodge and Milton John will be good additions to his circle of commandship, or should I say, his circle of commanding officers. Let me say that. Yes, they will be effective, hopefully, and whatever ill-discipline Bob Von Bodge has, hopefully Kronan can straighten that out, like how he straightened out Admiral Hakbar and Towton and Backstabber when they were talking with their pirate talk. He set them straight. So hopefully he can do the same thing for Bob Von Bodge, so that he doesn't have this culture of ill discipline also with his own knobs, sorry. And hopefully he will make sure that this boss does not lose focus on the missions that would come into the future. Really, Kronan has been doing a lot of activities in trying to cultivate his horde. Yes, his orc horde. He's been doing a lot to cultivate, to give it strength, to give it abilities, to give it some sort of semblance of unity in fighting. Unity in fighting. And I think it's worked out pretty well, in terms of molding his horde into a very powerful and effective fighting force that can be launched at any time, and they could crush the enemies with overwhelming force, overwhelming daka, overwhelming numbers, very effectively and swiftly. I think he has done a great job in maintaining the strength and the durability of his orcs. I was worried when he made the decision to lower down the Gallowfields in the warp, because I was thinking that maybe like a lot more demons were going to infiltrate his fleet and his orc numbers were going to dwindle. But it seems like it was only the Slaneshi demonettes and a demon of Slanesh were attacking them. I was expecting all the other factions of demons to also just pour themselves into the Orcs of Omen and the rest of the Orc fleet, because they had no protection in the warp. But it was only the Slaneshi forces, and they were easily dispatched off once Kronan was able to do the Haka dance. The sidebar with the penis, and how he sees a penis as this odd, anatomy part of whether Humies or Smeldar. Yeah, that sidebar was just painful. That sidebar was really, really painful. I do not want to remember that sidebar. I can just imagine that man screaming, as he's anatomy was just pulled from him, and all the blood just gushing out, and he just died in a whimper like that. Oh, that's just painful. That is just very painful. So yeah, that sidebar, I would like to just forget it. I would like to just forget that sidebar. Yeah, so Kronan has succeeded in defeating this Psyker Fern on Rama Lama Ding Dong, and he's also gained a new planet that he can further extend and expand his empire as he, continues his conquests against the Humies of the Imperium of Man. And yeah, more success to him. More success to him. I mean, the Psyker Fern, like I said, it was a threat. It needed to be taken care of. If it wasn't going to be the Orks, probably the Imperium of Man would be the ones to take care of this situation. Maybe the Grey Knights would come in and deal with the Psyker Fern, because it sounds like a very powerful Psyker entity. Maybe something like an Alpha Plus level of Psyker potential. So definitely, if it weren't the Orks, maybe it would be the Imperium of Man coming with very powerful factions or forces, I should say, to deal with this, this entity, because it's an abomination. It's a very powerful Xeno, and yeah, it had to go. It really had to go. So well done. Well done, Kronan, and to your war. You guys succeeded. Yeah. Alright guys, that's it. Remember, if you want to check out the original video or Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, give it a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I'll see you guys hopefully next week. Okay?